Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Fight Temple. That's Chow Boa. I'm Rob Zoatman. With us today, we have a special guest, the one and only Jordan Morley, Mr. I Judge Fights. Jordan, what's good?
Hey Rob, hey Chavo, good to see you guys. I've been really excited to be on the podcast. I love what you guys are doing. It's been a while waiting for someone to really cover what's been happening in Asia MMA, especially in a way to deliver to the Western world. So I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Jordan.
great. Sounds like it, Captain Monotone. Listen, um, we've known each other all for a long time, and we've done commentary together. We've done judge things together, and we've been involved in the fight game, all of us. And we're very interested in discussing some of the viewpoints because Joe's been an agent, Joe's been a commentator, I've been a commentator, I've been a fighter, I've been a coach, and you've been a judge, which is something that we haven't done. You've been a commentator as well, but you've been a judge. I haven't been a judge. So we want to see how the perspective changes of what's happening currently in the major leagues, as well as what happens in Asia, and then what we can look forward to, like how we can adjust our the way we judge fights, like the criteria around fights. And that was what your project, I Judge Fights, was attempting to do. So why don't you tell us about that, about I Judge Fights and your background with that?
Yeah, so when we started I Judge Fights, the idea was to really engage the fan base, statistically. So the idea was, at a certain point, we had enough people who were knowledgeable about the sport using the 10-point must system that if you had outliers, both one side or the other, they would be mathematically dropped out, and we could actually contribute as a judge, a collective judge, to score a fight. From the business point of view, we didn't get there, and I'll just tell you why. We learned something, and we learned it before the UFC did, and we learned it before Bellator did, and the lesson learned was you can't beat Twitter, right? So because both of those organizations, with all the resources, both technically, and financially, and talent-wise, made attempts to copy what we were doing afterwards, and they abandoned the projects that they were doing. Bellator had a really nice one, a really visually nice experience, but and they promoted it really well. It just never went anywhere. And people were just happy, or here's my score on Twitter. They didn't care about the more extensive data, right? And the excitement of second screen integration never really panned out the way we thought it would. That being said, certain things that we learned was if you actually have enough people scoring, likely they're going to get it right. So the fan base could theoretically be a really solid fourth judge. Because mathematically you average out the outliers, right? So we try to do it. So from a business point of view, there is not enough money to be made to actually keep going with the business, even though conceptually it kind of worked. And we did learn a lot. It gave us some heads up on some things I think will change in the sport of combat sports, not just MMA. Something I liked was Glory Kickboxing would, between certain events, have in-round scoring that everyone could see.
Yep.
Right? So you knew who was on the judges' scorecards after the third rounds of a 5-round fight, for example.
More transparency.
And that could potentially, if the in-arena teams can see where the scores are, affect the way they actually work the strategy in the corners.
So you mean Cecil Peoples and would have trouble getting to his car is what you're trying to tell me.
But no, more so is hey, listen, I thought I won that fight, but clearly that's not what the cards show. I can't cruise on the 5th round or the 4th round or whatever it may be. Because sometimes people do that.
They do it all the time, and you know what? When you're in a fight, you think that you won something sometimes, and other times you're right, sometimes you're wrong,
Yeah.
and you see guys going, "No, I thought I did enough," and I'm looking at the fight, I'm like, in what universe was that clear cut at all? I thought you were getting owned, and you spent the whole fight running backwards. You know,
Exactly.
how can you say you did
I
enough?
kind of feel when you're top level, it would be when you've got a corner and you've got, like, say, three guys. You got the one guy feeding you, this is what's happening, this is where you have to be, and another guy bringing your stool. He's got your compressor and he's got the ice in the bucket, and another guy doing wipe downs. One of them should be a certified judge.
Yeah.
And I think because he can say, listen, I know it feels this way from where you are in the cage, but there's a significant percentage chance that you're actually looking at a round you thought you won, but you're actually behind on. And that's why, and that should inform some strategy.
Right. I don't think that about the certification part. I don't know, but I know that when you listen to the corner live mic feeds and stuff like that, you sometimes hear people snowing their fighter. I call it snowing. Like they're bullshitting. Yeah. The Ronda fights, that was, well, as soon as she was losing, what did Edmund say? Edmund, this is the most glaring and obvious of all of the cornering mistakes, right? It's kind of like the gold standard of cornering f ups, right? But let's just say that's the best instance I can think of where you needed to be truthful, and then sometimes you get somebody being truthful. Duke Rufus sticks out to me as somebody who is like, okay, son, we're going to need you to crank up the volume. I know that you were trying this, but now you have to do this because this is let it all out this round. You know, you need a stoppage. Like he'll say it, you need a stoppage. Yeah. If you know, that means you lost the first two rounds, man. You have to win this third one. Greg Jackson has been known to, gently say, you need to do such and such this round. Concentrate on
concentrate on the positive instead of the negative, and what you do, not what you regret.
That's true. Like, and I get it, but like the problem is sometimes some people are too positive. Like, oh yeah, I totally won that round, keep it going. When no, you lost that round, and you need to like adjust.
You need to concentrate on what you're going to do. I think that's what Joe means is that you have to concentrate on what you're going to do, not on what happened last round as far as what's negative. But the inference when somebody, like I've heard Faraz say this, you need this round. Well, there's pressure there, but it's honesty. And above all, don't tell somebody that they won the last round if they didn't fucking win, they didn't win. And I as a fighter, I don't need somebody telling me, stuff like that at all, ever. Don't tell me that it was going my way if it wasn't going my way.
And also, there's, as a quarterman, I will say, because last year we were at the World Championships, amateur, MMAF, and there's one fighter, and clearly he was losing. And, because he wasn't a fighter that trained with me for a long time. He was basically, we starting this, the national team training camp, so I didn't get to know him that well. But I will say I see him will potentially get hurt, but he will be for sure losing it. So in the second half of the third round, so as a quarterman, actually I will tell him more instructions not to be more aggressive in order not to hurt himself, injure himself that much because he's young and got a future. And I will say, if he get mounted, I would say just, instead of bridging, I'll just say like hold him, because it doesn't matter, what you do. There's really like not much chance. If you do anything crazy, you might get injured. So that's something I want to put in. Another question, Jordan. I just thought of this. A lot of judges, they say when they rewatch the fight, and they will turn the volume off. So do you think there will be an idea of introducing the earplugs, just to have all the judges not to get too much of that noise, and to have a more fair of judgment?
So that is. Go
Okay,
ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead, Jordan.
Okay, so that's actually it's a tricky proposition, and because it's like two sides of a coin, and I'll explain why. So when you judge a fight at cage side, it's very different from watching a fight on television, and very different from watching a fight in the crowd live, and I'll tell you why. When you are right there, okay, cage side, you don't just see it, you don't just hear it, you feel it. And the example I will give, Alex Neal versus Luke Jameau. Two guys who punch the shit out of each other very hard, and they hit each other so hard I could feel it.
Yeah.
Right through the cage, through the judge's table, and into my personal body.
Yeah.
They were hitting each other so hard. It was an incredible experience and a great honor for me to judge that fight. Right, and two human beings who I really, really have a ton of respect and adoration for. Obviously, become friends after with Alex and Luke. I cheer on in the UFC.
Yeah.
The people in the audience, they can hear it, but they don't feel it. The people on TV, they don't
look like
feel
anything
it
to them. They don't get it.
But what they're hearing is the commentators, and then you have with the commentators we call the Joe Rogan effect. Right?
Yep.
It's you might be seeing something and you're hearing this in your ear about what Joe's saying. And I'm not picking on Joe. I just named it after Joe. My brother, my partner named it after Joe because he's the most prominent voice. But if he sees something a certain way, people have a tendency to listen and then view the fight that way.
Well, he's a dynamic commentator, man. And
he's my favorite commentator.
Right. And when he's so enthusiastic and so knowledgeable, you get sucked right in along if you're at home.
Yeah, some people has the ability, people actually tell me sometimes if I sell something, people are like, oh, I thought that was real. I would say I was just joking with you.
No, listen, Joe Rogan could sell ice cubes to an Eskimo, right?
Hey,
ice cubes coming.
He's a professional talker, literally.
Yeah, he's brilliant. He's so good at it, but that has an effect. So if you're watching, now here's the thing. I want to walk you through the experience. If I'm judging a fight, my eyes do not waver from the fighters for 1 fucking second. Apologies for swearing. But, and I will have people come up, I've been a head judge, and people who are running the show will come up and they talk to me. I do not take my eyes off the fight. They need to talk to the side of my head. I will not look at them for 1 second. I'm not saying that's for everyone. I'm just saying that's how I do it, right? I zone in. I am that zoned in. I will not even acknowledge their existence really, like visually, right? I may respond verbally, but whatever. Problem is, that's how I do it, and I have the opportunity to sit at the side of a cage. I'm feeling it. I'm hearing it. I'm seeing it. I'm smelling it. The people in the crowd, they're having beers. They're hearing each other cheer, and depending on what the crowd's cheering for, that can sway other people, especially the casual. The people watching on television, again, they have a very different a skewed viewpoint. And if you're watching in a bar with your friends, when you're like, oh, I think that guy won the fight, listen, half the time you're talking to the waitress, you're talking to your buddy, you're chatting here, you're checking your phone, you're looking at Twitter. You're not judging a fight. You're scoring what you saw, which is fair, and that's what you have to do. You can only score what you see. Yep. But you are losing a significant percentage of the fight. And so when I'm cage side, I'm staring intently, and I'm feeling everything, right? And that is a very big difference to watching on television. And I think that's why certain times where fights where judges may have it kind of right if you review it with the sound off, versus when people are watching it at home, watch it the first time, they got 15 friends over splitting a pay-per-view, and what the fuck, because Joe Rogan just said that guy should have won.
Well, here's the thing. I'm arrogant enough that I don't require Joe Rogan to say anything. So as much as I enjoy his commentary, I don't require it, and I don't always agree. So, like, we'll see something, and I'll be like, that's not what's happening. And usually Joe's right, but I will say this, sometimes he's not. And other promotions, like sometimes I'm watching other promotions, I'm like, that's not what's happening at all. And you've clearly been told that this guy's the second coming, but he's getting his leg chopped up, and you're not addressing it. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of times you see stuff like that in one. For instance, I'll just call it for what it is. As much as I like one, I find it fantastic entertainment. And there's a lot of good fighters, but what I'm saying is that there's not always that impartiality that's required of an announcer. So as a person that likes to think that they can judge shit, the quality of the microphones is a big deal. And so I need that sound. When you turn off the things, I can watch it from a technical standpoint, sure. But if you watch Wonder Boy versus Tyron Woodley, Wonder Boy does way more striking. People are like, oh yeah, look how many times he hit him, and they're looking at CompuStrike. I'm like, CompuStrike doesn't measure force. It doesn't measure force at all. Whereas your ears hear that stuff. You hear, you know the difference between that slap of the foot hitting the thigh or the shin hitting the, totally different. And when you say you're feeling stuff, that's somebody's fist hitting ribs. That's somebody's shin hitting, hitting the thigh or the other person's shin. There's a distinct thunk that goes with that. And people that are in the first row are gasping, but people that are back, 10 rows having a good time, they're like, oh yeah, so he kicked him, big deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and before I jump in, I think more that I want to say when Tyron Woodley fought Wonderboy Thompson, I was actually at Cage's sports bar in Shanghai, and when Bruce Buffer first announced it, I started screaming, "He's wrong!"
Yeah, in
front of a whole bunch of people, I said, "He's wrong. That's a majority draw," and then they came in, they corrected it, right, and it was great because there was this entire sports media company sitting at the table in front of me who watched me do that. So validated because they said, no, that's a majority draw. It's just an unusual thing. But going back to what you're saying about the thuds and the CompuStrike. So one of the things when we talk about the 10-point must system in unified rules, especially the traditional rules, I'm not going to go into how they've modified recently because not every athletic commission has accepted this. Is, and I had with I Just Fights, that was a project we developed with Big John McCarthy and Jaron Villal. And I like to, and both wonderful human beings and a lot of fun to work with. And I'd also like to say, because like Big John gets so many accolades, Jaron Villal is one of the best technical officials in the game. He doesn't get in the cage very often because they actually have him cage side to run around and make sure everything else is running smooth.
Yeah.
He knows his stuff really, really well. I love a shout out to Jaron Villal. So when they were developing in the early days the criteria to try and take MMA mainstream and get it accepted by the athletic commissions, they wrote down damage, grappling, cage control, and aggression.
Yeah.
And the athletic commission consultant.
But they changed the terms.
So the athletic commission said you can't call it damage. So what happened was they renamed it as effective striking, but you need to read it as damage. So when people see the criteria, the 4 criteria that you use being effective striking, effective grappling, cage control, and aggression, they're not equal and they are in a specific order. And you're supposed to read effective striking, you're supposed to read it as damage. Okay. Yeah. If one fighter does more damage, that's the criteria you use. If it's equal damage, you then consider the effective grappling. Aggression and cage control are only to ever be used if the first 2 are a dead draw, which they almost never aren't.
Right.
Are a dead draw, right? Some people think, oh, they're all equal. They're not. And even if you say 2 and 2 are different, the top 2 or more and the bottom 2, no. You only use the bottom 2 if you have a dead draw on the top 2, which is near impossible. Not impossible, but near impossible, right?
Okay.
And that's it. So damage is the key thing. And so, for example, if you say...
the whole point of fighting, to be perfectly honest, Nothing controls the cage as well as lighting somebody up when they're in your perimeter. So nothing controls a fight as much as mount and ground and pound. Like that's the most definitive thing you can do in a
Sure.
fight: mount and ground and pound. So yeah, damage, man. That's
And when you give the example of Wonderboy Thompson, right, where like, okay, sure, CompuStrike, but like when we were doing our course with Big John, he's like, listen, and he showed us videos of different videos, like, yeah, this guy landed 7 shots, medium to light medium damage.
yeah,
Other dude hit 2 on a counter who rocked the other guy.
right. Oh yeah, he
Guy,
knocked him down once, cut him the other time.
even if he's not stumbling back and rolling his eyes back, but he didn't go down, you hurt him. And the thing is that damage can also be, and this is what was really interesting. Damage is also like if you hurt someone enough that they have to change their game plan.
Hey, like switch their stances or
Like, oh,
change
damn, yeah, I can't do this because even if defensively your defense has damaged his offense enough for him like no longer want to engage.
Yep.
Damage. The one thing that stood out that was a surprise during the course, and I can't remember the fight, so I apologize, but it was a Tito Ortiz fight, I think. I'm not 100%. Where someone took a back mount, like a standing RNC attempt.
Yep.
And the other fighter is trying to carry him. But the guy did it in a position, and I think it was Tito Ortiz, and he forced his opponent to carry that weight for like 2.5 minutes.
Yep.
And you're talking like, how much was Tito at 205, right?
Oh yeah, it's like 235 pounds.
You're making a guy carry 205 plus for 2.5 minutes in your back. He's like, that's also damage because you're exhausting his, the blood oxygen capacity of his legs, lactic acid buildup.
Yep.
You're reducing the effectiveness of
grinding it. Same as if you were grinding him against the cage and stomping on his feet or whatever. You're doing the same thing. You're grinding him.
Like in a video game, if you had those levels going and like graphics, you like
the bar gets smaller.
Going smaller, and that's exactly what you're doing. And he's like,
so, yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, you just glitched for a second. I was not sure we're still going. Yeah. So, Chow Bo, when you see the way that I want to talk about the fighters, their ability to change to match the judging criteria, because we've been talking about the unified rules the whole time. But when you look at the rule changes, are there any significant rule changes or judging considerations to be made for the amateur MMA?
Well, the amateur MMA is not, as the rules not as renewed as professional. So there's still like
right,
the traditional third point, touch the ground. There's no like a soccer kick, that kind of stuff. So for amateur MMA, which is they wear shin guards, which is very not very thin, but it's easy to. It's like a sock. You can just put on and take off. And also, there's no elbows. And then the gloves are a little thicker. They're like sparring gloves. Okay. So which means this will allow just minimize the chance we'll get injured, and also to make sure the fighters can fight like a few days in a row. So I think, to me, I'm really fascinated by this because you got to see a fighter to compete in as open rules as possible, but still you see them like you're fighting every day for a week. Yeah. So you get to know, he had a really hard fight yesterday, so how's he going to do today? But his opponent got an easy round yesterday.
Super heavy sparring like we saw in Qingdao that time.
Yeah. And there's no right. There's no elbows. Yeah. And because I was thinking about it, what if there's elbow pads? But the thing is, it's just preventing cutting, not to to prevent any like knockouts or stuff.
Yeah.
But
Well,
you know, for
my single biggest beef is you can't train very effectively with elbows as a fighter. Simply because of that, because even if you put the pads on, it's still a problem. So
yeah,
we end up not using elbows, and you can see guys are in a positions where I'm going, that's a perfect spot for an elbow. But during the fight, you don't think about it because you're used to just hitting with like an over padded glove. Like sparring can actually draw bad habits, and this is something that I believe has been Tony Ferguson's main weapon. Has been that he didn't spar for like 6 or 7 years. He didn't have active sparring in his camps. So he only did movements and conditioning, and just condition his mind. And he had virtual opponents. That's all he did. So he never like was beating on people. And I mean, Cerrone didn't for different reasons because he was tired of taking damage. But like literally, Tony didn't do it, and I believe that's why is that he was getting his mind, like the order of operations, correct.
yeah.
And he's not the most athletically gifted guy, even though he is obviously a fantastic athlete.
Yeah.
But I mean, some of the guys he's beating are much more, physically gifted than he is. Kevin Lee and Edson Barbosa being two that stand out.
So that's another point. That's another point. The
And
fighters, the fighters doesn't need to be as athletic as other sports athletes, right? It's a different type of athlete.
Yeah.
You move differently, and because me and Rob were talking about the traditional martial arts, I want to mention this. So if we say in MMA, two guys in a open striking situation, that's dimension number one. Maybe I'll say this: that dimension number one. People got into clinch. Dimension number two. People in the clinch, like going for takedowns to try to take someone down. That dimension number three, and then dimension number four, that'll be on the ground. Dimension number five would be cage work. So we were talking about what Tony Ferguson tried to achieve. I think it's subconsciously because he doesn't really get engaged that much of the time. He just got engaged, grab, and he'll let it go. Right? We call it the sixth dimension. I think the sixth dimension will be a revolutionary to make MMA as a whole. I don't know if I'm off the topic right now, but the reason I say this because I was also thinking about for amateur MMA, there's no elbows for sure, and also there's one thing I would like to see it change. I would like to see in the finals they open everything because there's no fight left in the next day.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like a fundamental or basic. You learn punching, striking without using elbows.
You know what? In Asia MMA, I have no problem with that because, I mean, in Asia MMA, you basically have to be pro in a certain way. So if you half of them are. So you get to the end of the thing. If you've got no more extra fight, you might as well do what you're saying, Chabo, is just go on full on for that last fight because you don't have another one, right? So I understand that.
But the problem is, as a competitor, you may be really good with knees and elbows,
right?
And you may lose some jab your face off guy the round before, or some guy whose head is always there, but he's like the crotch sniffer wrestler, and his head's right there, you can elbow, but you can't elbow him, and then he goes on to the final when you could totally smash the guy in the final, but he gets there and now it's an open rule set. You're like, if that's me, I win the tournament. Here I'm a bronze. What the fuck's going on? So you got to be consistent across the board.
No, that's true.
Sake. But I understand what you're saying. Now, if you compare, you mentioned Asian MMA, and you compare Asian MMA, there's like an issue with perception of various positions. So they didn't much care for elbows in Pride. They didn't allow elbows, but they allowed soccer kicks.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Like allow soccer kicks.
North-south knees on the ground, stuff like seriously damaging stuff was allowed, but elbows weren't. Elbow is like superficial damage, but they were like, no, not the blood, please, So I really like one's open rule set, but I'm not a fan of one's judging. I'd like to say that we could probably. I'd like to see us talk about that a little bit, like the adjustments that they've made that you like or don't.
So when it comes to one, I understand because like they were really trying to attach themselves to the Pride thing because it was regional and it was preceding to UFC and it had immense popularity. I get why one went that way. Okay.
Right.
And sometimes, like, I hear fighters talk about, oh, they judge the fight in a whole. There's a lot of like factors and difficulties with doing that. And my biggest issue is I actually don't get the feeling in one, and I know the guys at one, they're all great people. I get on with them really well, and they do a great job. I don't really feel that they're actually judging the fight as a whole, Pride style. Okay.
How can you when the fight still has rounds?
Because it has rounds, right? And I kind of know as you're going through it. I'm just saying they're kind of doing it as it's like you're judging each round and making note, but not officially handing it in, and then making a final decision at the end. And I'm like, right? And the problem is,
it's still better than some of the old school Chinese local competitions. The head of the judge will raise the red flag or a blue flag.
That's another 3 episodes. That's 3 more episodes we can talk and nothing but that. We have stories and you've been there. We could do episodes in Ultimate Wrestle and Xi'an, and we could talk about like real fights in the middle of nowhere and jungle.
Okay, this our Chinese champion didn't get knocked out, so Mr. Producer or Director, does this look okay that I still give him this? Was the fans gonna say anything? Commentators, did you get this covered? Did you use your magical voice?
We've seen some special events. I'll just say that, all working in Chinese MMA.
Damn it! I got to commentate one like a fake ass fight, and it was so fake. The fight ended so quickly, but it's still there's time, right? There's still time, and those and the director goes like a camera, boom, Chabo, keep talking, like just right on my face. Yeah, keep talking. I was like, well, that fight just like a fucking suplex and a ground and pound finish. So I really dislike the fighter, but I had to say all the good things about him because the camera was just right on my face.
I remember being at the one Ultimate Wrestle event, Xi'an, and
that one Ultimate Wrestler, great.
The referee turns around, he looks. And the one coach holds up a red card, and he's like, okay, fight's done, even though the one dude was winning. And they just ended it because the coach from the other team who was hosting held up a red card. And we're like, we can see this, you know?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
But that's not judging. That's not reffing. That's just bullshit.
Yeah, they're exhibitions. That's why those don't go on your record. It's quite simple because there's too many nefarious factors surrounding the preparation, the hosting, the judging, the officiating, the prep. Like the back room,
in the matchmaking. Like we could spend an entire 90-minute episode sharing stories about stuff we've seen. Let's just focus on judging right now. I don't know how much time we have.
Judging and rules, man. Like officiating.
Yeah, can I pause this for a second so to keep this for next episode?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's half an hour. We can all take a break. Okay, guys, we'll be back.